There is a quiet moment that arrives in life, not all at once, but little by little, when we begin to notice that the world isn't quite as loud as it used to be. The phone rings less. The calendar, once cluttered with appointments and birthdays, becomes blank more often than not. The voices that used to echo through the house, of family, friends, even neighbors, seem to grow more distant, until one day you realize that much of your day will unfold in silence, and much of your heart will stretch into a space no one else is filling. It can feel unsettling. Not just because you're alone, but because somewhere deep inside, you didn't think this was how it would feel. You didn't expect that one day the quiet would outlast the conversation, that your name wouldn't come up in stories quite as often, or that people would move on, even when your love for them never did. And so you sit with the unspoken question, have I been left behind? That question, tender, raw and honest, is one many carry as they age, even if they never say it aloud. And yet, Buddhism teaches us that silence is not the enemy. Stillness is not a punishment. In fact, the absence of noise, when welcomed with awareness, can become the beginning of the deepest presence. The Buddha often retreated into the forest, not to escape people, but to remember himself. Because sometimes being left alone isn't a rejection, it's a return. This video isn't here to deny the ache of loneliness. It exists. It's real. But there is a difference, a sacred one, between being lonely and being alone. And once you begin to see that difference, what once felt like emptiness can slowly transform into spaciousness. You stop needing constant interaction to feel worthy and start discovering a kind of peace that was waiting patiently beneath all the noise. So today we'll walk together through the subtle beauty of being left alone, not from the lens of loss, but from the wisdom of stillness. We'll reflect on how the quiet moments you now live with can become doorways to freedom, and how the solitude you didn't ask for might become the greatest teacher of your later years. You haven't been forgotten. You've been given space, and what you choose to grow in that space may just surprise you. Lesson 1. The house has grown quiet, but your spirit has not. There is a very particular kind of silence that settles over a house when children have moved out, when the clatter of family dinners has faded, when no one knocks on the door without warning anymore. It's the sound of a life that has slowed down not by choice but by circumstance, and at first it can feel like the walls themselves are whispering a kind of emptiness back to you. The air feels too still, the rooms feel too big, and without meaning to, you begin to wonder if your life has started shrinking with the quiet. For many people after 60, especially those who have lost a partner or who live far from their children, this silence isn't just the absence of noise. It can feel like the absence of mattering. You wake up and realize that no one's day will be disrupted if you sleep in, or skip lunch, or walk a little slower on your way to the mailbox. There is no bus to catch, no meeting to prepare for, no child tugging at your hand. At first, it can feel like your life has stopped being seen. But what if, and this is the gentle shift Buddhism offers us, what if the stillness isn't a sign that life is over? What if it's a sign that life is finally offering you space to meet yourself? For years, maybe decades, you lived in service to others. You showed up. You carried responsibilities, burdens, expectations. You took care of people. You answered the phone even when you were tired. You cooked meals when no one said thank you. You did all the things that gave meaning to your days, but perhaps also kept you far from your own stillness. And now, in the hush that has arrived, you are given something precious that few recognize at first: uninterrupted time with your own spirit. This is not the kind of alone that feels hollow. This is the kind that becomes sacred when you stop trying to fill it. When you stop seeing the silence of your home as a loss, and start seeing it as a return to the rhythm of your breath, the sound of your own footsteps, the thoughts that only emerge when no one else is speaking. One Buddhist teacher once said, "Solitude is not the absence of others but the presence of yourself." And when you begin to approach the quiet of your house with that lens, everything softens, the tea tastes deeper, the light through the window becomes more golden. The book you've been meaning to read stops being a distraction and becomes a doorway. There's a story of an elderly woman who lived alone in a small village nestled at the edge of a forest. For years after her husband passed, neighbors assumed she was lonely. They would bring her food, check in with polite concern, offer to visit more often. But one day, when a young visitor asked if she ever wished for more company, she smiled and said, "I used to fear being alone. But now the quiet feels like a friend who knows me better than anyone else ever has." She wasn't isolated. She was accompanied by herself and by the life she had cultivated through presence. So if you find yourself walking through your own house and noticing how the silence lingers, don't rush to fill it with television or noise. Try sitting with it. Listen. Let it speak. You may discover that underneath the ache of what's no longer there lives the whisper of something new, your own spirit, waiting to be noticed again. Because the house may have grown quiet, but you have not. And in that silence, there is a life still unfolding, still breathing, still deeply, beautifully alive. Lesson 2. When the phone stops ringing, and what it's really saying, it used to be something you didn't even notice. The sound of the phone ringing, a message waiting, a check-in from your daughter, a quick call from an old friend. The gentle hum of connection was always there, like background music. But then at some point, maybe without warning, the silence stretched longer. The phone stayed still, and when it did ring, it was a reminder. Not of joy, but of how long it had been. It's one of the quiet heartbreaks of aging that no one really warns you about, the slowing down of communication. Not because people stopped loving you. Not always. Sometimes it's just life. Children grow into their own chaos. Friends move, forget, get caught up. And little by little, the calls become less frequent, the messages fewer, the updates shorter, until one day you look at your phone and realize you've gone a full week without hearing your name spoken out loud. And it hurts. Not always in a sharp way, but in a soft, aching way that lives beneath the surface. You start to wonder if you're still a part of people's daily lives, if your stories still matter, if anyone even notices the silence you've been sitting in. But here's something Buddhism teaches us, something quietly powerful. When the world stops calling, you finally have the chance to listen inward. Because for most of your life, your attention has been pointed outward, responding to others, meeting needs, answering calls, sometimes even when you didn't have the energy. But now in this pause, something deeper is unfolding. You're being offered the rarest thing in the modern world, uninterrupted space to come home to yourself. You may think, but I don't want that kind of space. I want connection. Yes, of course you do. We all do. And meaningful connection is still possible and necessary. But what if this season of fewer phone calls isn't about loss, but about redirection? There's an old Zen saying, when no one is listening to you, that is the best time to listen to yourself. It sounds simple, but it holds a kind of liberation, because when you stop expecting the phone to bring you meaning, you start finding it elsewhere, in your morning rituals, in the taste of your tea, in the way your heart softens when you look out the window, in the way your breath slows when no one is asking anything of you. Let me share a story. There was a retired librarian named Mr. Avery. He used to speak to hundreds of people a week, recommending books, helping children learn to read, chatting with regulars after retirement, and especially after his wife passed. The silence came like a wave. For months he checked his phone 10, 20 times a day. The emptiness of it felt unbearable. But one day, he stopped. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he realized he had been waiting for others to tell him he still mattered. Instead he began writing again. Letters mostly. Some he sent, others he didn't. He wrote down memories, recipes, funny thoughts, poems. His phone still rang rarely, but his heart grew louder. And when people finally did call, they found a man not bitter with distance, but full of stories, because he had stayed close to himself. What you do with the silence says more about your spirit than the number of people reaching out. You can fill it with longing, or you can fill it with you. So the next time you look at your phone and feel that familiar heaviness, pause. Instead of asking who isn't thinking of you, ask, what have I forgotten to listen to inside myself? The calls may have slowed, but your life hasn't. And the voice that matters most, it's still speaking, soft, steady, and waiting to be heard. Lesson 3. When you're no longer needed, and why that's not the end. There is a subtle shift that happens in life, and for many it arrives quietly, like a door that once opened easily now sticking just a little. You begin to notice that fewer people ask for your help. No one needs a ride to school anymore. No one calls to double-check a recipe or to ask how to change a flat tire. The questions have stopped coming. The favors have grown fewer, and the role you once played so naturally, the advisor, the helper, the fixer, starts to fall away without fanfare. And in its place, a strange stillness settles in. At first it can feel like loss, like being written out of a story you helped write. You remember a time when your hands were always busy, your phone always buzzing, your schedule full because you were needed, not just liked, not just loved, but essential. And now, even with the best intentions from others, you feel like more of a guest than a pillar in people's lives. It's easy in that space to question your worth, to feel like your relevance has expired. But here's where the Buddhist view offers a quiet, powerful reframing. You were never meant to be useful forever, at least not in the way the world defines usefulness. In Buddhism, value isn't measured by how much you produce, how much advice you give, or how many people need you. In fact, true wisdom often begins when the doing slows down, when you stop serving others out of obligation and begin being present out of intention. There is a story in the Buddhist tradition about an aging monk who was once revered for his teaching and leadership. As he grew older, younger monks took over his duties. He no longer gave the morning talks. He no longer led ceremonies. At first he felt invisible, forgotten, until one day another monk said to him, "Even in your silence, your presence holds this temple together." That moment was transformative, because it reminded him that sometimes what we offer isn't loud or obvious. It's not always in what we do, it's in how we are. Your presence matters. Your stillness holds weight. Your gaze, your wisdom, your way of just being. They carry a frequency that others, often without realizing, draw strength from. You may not be needed in the way you once were, but you are felt. Let me tell you about Clarissa, an 81-year-old retired nurse. For decades her home was full, family dinners, neighbors stopping by, grandchildren needing help with homework or colds or school drop-offs. But after her husband passed and her children moved away, the visits slowed, the requests stopped. One day she told her therapist, "It's like no one needs me anymore." But her therapist gently asked, "What if this is the first time you're being asked to need yourself?" Clarissa began to change her mornings. She lit a candle during breakfast. She spoke affirmations aloud. She began painting again, not for anyone to see, but simply to feel something move through her. She wasn't being needed anymore in the way she had been, but she was being lived through, and that, she realized, was just as holy. You don't need to be needed to be meaningful. Your value was never just in your hands. It's in your heart, in your presence, in the softness you bring into a room, in the space you create when you simply choose to be there fully. So the next time that ache rises, that echo of "Am I still useful?" let it be a bell of awakening. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to be whole, because love doesn't always knock on your door with requests. Sometimes it sits beside you in silence, grateful that you're still here. Lesson 4. You will lose people you love, but love never leaves you. There are few things more certain in this life than the fact that we will lose the people we love. Some we lose to time, others to distance, and some, perhaps the deepest ache of all, we lose to death. In old age, these goodbyes seem to come more often and with less warning. Friends we once laughed with, a partner whose presence was as familiar as our own breath, a sibling who remembered us when we were still young. The world grows quieter, not just because people leave, but because the ones who once gave it color are no longer here to paint it with us. It is easy in that grief to feel hollowed out, to feel like pieces of ourselves went with them, never to return. You find yourself reaching for their name in conversation and pausing. You hear a song or catch a scent and feel the wave rise unexpectedly. Even years later, the loss returns, soft, uninvited, and real. And sometimes the loneliness that settles in isn't just about being alone in a room, it's about being without someone. Their laughter, their listening, their love. But Buddhism teaches us something both heartbreaking and profoundly freeing, that nothing, not even love, is permanent in form, but everything that's real leaves an imprint, and that imprint doesn't disappear. It transforms. In Buddhist thought, the idea of non-attachment doesn't mean we love less. It means we love more freely, with the awareness that everything we hold dear is by nature impermanent. The people we love are like waves. They rise, they crest, they return to the ocean. And yet the ocean remembers every wave, so it is with love. The people may be gone, but the love remains, not locked away in memory, but woven into the way we carry ourselves each day. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Thomas who lost his wife after nearly 50 years of marriage. For months after her passing, he couldn't bring himself to move her slippers from beside the bed. Every morning he'd wake up and instinctively reach to the other side of the mattress. And when the phone rang, for just a moment, he expected it to be her. But one morning, as he brewed tea, he added a spoonful of honey, something he had never done before. It was how she always took her tea. And without thinking, he smiled. Not because the grief had disappeared, it hadn't, but because in that small gesture, he realized something profound. She was still here, not in body, not in voice, but in the tenderness that now lived in him. The way he spoke more gently, the way he looked at the morning sun, the way he had started humming while washing dishes, her old habit, now his. This is what Buddhist wisdom means when it says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The person is gone, but the love never leaves. It simply changes shape. Every kindness they gave you, you now give to others. Every lesson they taught you lives on in how you face life's difficulties. Their memory is not a tombstone. It is a temple, and you are its caretaker. So if your heart is aching from loss, If you feel that kind of loneliness that no call or visit can fix, let this be your reminder. You do not have to let go of their love in order to move forward. You carry them in your voice, in your patience, in the way you sit quietly with someone else's pain, and in doing so, they are never truly gone. Love is not limited to the living. It is the current that flows through all of us, undivided, unseen, but deeply felt. Even when they are no longer here, love still is. Lesson 5. When you no longer have to be anyone, you can finally be yourself. There comes a quiet turning point in life, often unexpected and rarely celebrated, when you realize no one is looking to you to play a part anymore. You're not the worker, not the parent with young children, not the dependable neighbor or the strong one holding everything together. No one expects you to be the peacemaker at family dinners or the host during holidays. And with that, something both strange and sacred begins to happen. You are no longer required to perform. At first, it can feel disorienting. If your whole life was spent being something for someone, useful, likable, responsible, then being alone, unobserved, can feel like a kind of erasure. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when no one needs you to be anything? But here's the truth that Buddhist wisdom gently whispers: this is not a loss of identity. This is a liberation from it. When the spotlight fades, you're finally allowed to see what's beneath the costume. You begin to remember what it feels like to breathe without pressure, to sit without expectation, to think without filtering every thought through someone else's lens. This is the space where the true self emerges, not the one shaped by roles or responsibilities, but the one that simply is. In Zen, there is a teaching that says, when you cease to be what others want, you begin to be what you are. Let me share a story that captures this. Eleanor, 83, spent most of her life as a school principal, firm, respected, always composed. Her presence in any room carried authority. Even in retirement, people expected her to be the wise one, the organized one, the one with answers. But as the years passed and the visits slowed, she noticed something subtle but profound. No one needed her to lead anymore. At first, she felt unmoored. Her schedule, once rigid and productive, now had wide-open mornings. She found herself sitting by the window longer, not rushing, not planning, just watching birds come and go. She began sketching, something she hadn't done since childhood. She started wearing colors she loved, instead of the neutrals she thought were appropriate. And slowly, the woman underneath the principal began to breathe again. She told a friend once, "For the first time, I don't have to pretend I know what I'm doing." And that oddly feels like the truest thing I've ever known. That is the beauty of this stage of life. Not that it strips you of purpose, but that it returns you to your most essential purpose, to live in alignment with who you are, not who you were expected to be. You are no longer defined by your job, your role in the family, or your usefulness to others. You are defined by your presence, your quiet joy, your awareness, your ability to sit with yourself, not with shame or restlessness, but with curiosity and gentleness. And from this space, something incredible happens. People begin to feel more drawn to you, not because you're trying to impress them, but because there is something deeply attractive about someone who is simply at peace with themselves. You become the eye of the storm, a quiet center, a reflection of what others are longing for in their own lives: stillness, sincerity, truth. So if you've noticed that you're no longer being asked to play a role, don't rush to fill the gap. Let it be, let it breathe, and then ask yourself, softly, patiently, who am I when I no longer have to be anyone else? Because that answer might be the most beautiful one you've ever given. Closing thoughts. You're not disappearing, you're returning. So much of what we call loneliness in old age is not about being alone. It's about being unsure how to exist in the quiet. We were raised in noise. We were defined by others. We were seen through roles, expectations, relationships. And now in this season of life, the roles fade, the expectations soften, and the rooms grow still. But silence is not the enemy. It's the first time many of us are truly allowed to hear the sound of our own spirit. You are not invisible. You are not less than who you were. You are becoming something else. Someone who no longer needs to be needed to know they matter. Someone who no longer fears being alone because they have come to know the companion within. The house may be quiet. The phone may be still. The world may have turned its attention elsewhere. But the sacred truth is this: you have not been left behind. You have been invited back to yourself. You've learned that when the phone doesn't ring, your inner voice can speak louder. You've seen that even when you are no longer the center of someone else's world, you still hold the center of your own. And most beautifully of all, you've begun to feel that the loss of old connections is not the end of love, but the beginning of its deeper form. One that asks nothing, needs nothing, and simply is. In Buddhist practice, we are taught to stop chasing after what is leaving us, and instead to become fully present with what remains. And what remains right now is you, your breath, your wisdom, your story still unfolding. So when the silence returns, as it will, let it sit beside you like a trusted friend. Let it remind you not of what is missing, but of what has been waiting for you all along. Peace, presence, and the quiet power of your own being. You are not disappearing. You are returning to your truth, your essence, your wholeness. And that is not something to grieve. That is something to celebrate. If this reflection touched something in you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words may be the very thing someone else is searching for. And if you'd like more gentle, heartfelt teachings like this, grounded in Buddhist wisdom and made with care for souls like yours, please subscribe to the channel, because solitude isn't a closing chapter. It's the space where your truest self begins to speak.